rise above the static, dissecting issues diplomatic. With mics in hand, they brave the storm of clashing views and norms transform. The Pundits Podcast, bold and true, shining light on red and blue. Through heated takes and reasoned thought, they seek the truth that can't be bought. From climate change to foreign ties, they pause the spinning and sift the lies. No stone unturned, no topic taboo, as left and right come into view.
Hey everybody, this is Razib with The Conversation, and today the cons are considerably outnumbered by the, well, I don't want to say Josiah's, but that is like literally true. So I am here with Josiah Neely, my usual partner in crime, or non-crime actually, or maybe pre-crime. And yeah. Oh, okay. That is fair. That is totally true. That is for the paywall. No, but in any case, I'm here with Josiah Neely of R Street and Josiah Lippincott, who, for those of you that are on Twitter, you know who he is. For those of you who are not on Twitter, actually, the future Dr. Lippincott is what I'm going to say. You are a political science PhD candidate. You went to Hillsdale. Yeah. There's some of these things that have kind of like become salient to people. But I'm actually kind of curious, like, how would you introduce yourself to people who just don't know you?
Yeah, I am a student at Hillsdale College in political science. I'm pursuing my PhD. I'm a Marine Corps veteran and served for 4 years in the artillery. I was an officer. And then my focus is on American political life. So I write about the things I'm interested in studying. I consider myself a student and an observer. And but I also care about my country. So I'm a patriot too. So student, observer, patriot. How about that?
Yeah. So actually, I mean, you're just okay. Some funny stories. Over the last week, multiple people have asked me, because like Josiah Neely and me are quite close friends, have asked me, wait, is this your Josiah? So I'm gonna use the name Lippincott and Neely on this podcast, for the viewer and the listener for obvious reasons. But over the last, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years, yeah.
I've had people confuse us on like Signal. I was in a group chat for a while.
Yes.
Yeah. The way I do it is, if someone ever tries to like cancel me or whatever, I'll just say it was you. So it's fine.
Yeah, and it'll be right. So it'll be no problem. I'll take it. I'll take the blame. Mea culpa now. Here's the pre-apology for whatever the cancelable thing I say next week. You're absolved. I absolve you.
Well, this is the first time this has happened. The first time actually I saw a Neely Lippincott confusion. Actually, that had happened was years ago in the previous pre-Musk regime, where you were actually your account was taken. What was, I don't remember, something economic nationalism. I don't remember what was it. What happened?
Wasn't it the Irish that finally got you, or?
Well, they never told me what tweet it was, but I did this big thread on the Democratic Party, the differences in the ethnic backgrounds of the Republican and Democratic Party, and how they had continued to manifest themselves in the future. It was really about there were no Protestants or white Anglo-Saxon Protestants within the Biden administration, or really the leadership of the Democratic Party. And that was a sociological point. Like, I wasn't condemning Irish Catholics. I have many Irish Catholic friends, many Jewish friends, but it was a sociological point. And I was banned shortly afterward, so I assume that was what it was, but it could have been something else. So I was banned prior to that for saying Kyle Rittenhouse did nothing wrong. Then I threatened to sue Twitter. They gave me my account back, but obviously they were mad at me, and then I got banned. So there was really a play here.
Yeah, the previous regime, to be fair, just like for context for people that don't know, because again, not everyone's on Twitter or X, so they don't know. It was you had to be quite careful if you were of the right side political persuasion of what you said, or hammer would come down. And just to be clear, Josiah Neely is an Irish Catholic, but not really.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah,
diversity reigns.
I'm part of the HOG, the Hiberian occupied government going on.
Is that right?
All right. Yeah, so more recently, there's been like a huge political brouhaha around immigration and the H1-B's, and you kind of, I mean, it's okay. Like I'm gonna say, it's a little weird because it's not like you're right. I don't think you're. Are you in DC right now, or are you in
No,
Michigan?
I'm in
Yeah, so
Michigan.
you're not like a DC guy who's like jumping in. You're not like Cernovich or the sort of there are some usual people that you expect to kind of okay. For example, McIntyre, who like I met, he's a great guy.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's got a show. He's a figure. So you expect him to, and obviously Elon, and like then there's you, like Lippincott, inserting himself. Like it's a little weird, don't you think? It's like that you are actually like arguably more of the nexus of this. Which like actually, I'm not sure if
Yeah.
you think it's weird. Like from what you have said online, I think you're quite happy. But I mean, it's just
Yeah.
like who the hell? I mean, honestly, I'm just like whoa, like who the hell is this guy? Like how did that
Yeah.
happen, right?
Well, and I'd say, it came out of nowhere for me as well. I was banned for 2.5 years. So I was unbanned on Twitter 1 hour before Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race after being banned from December of 2021 onward. And so, yeah, whatever large platform, I would have accumulated in those intervening years was not an option. If you weren't following me on Substack, you weren't following me at all. And I'd had a bit of attraction beforehand. I talked primarily about military issues, and that's why I went viral initially, went on Fox News twice. But then as this immigration discussion got going, I was participating, and then the vice president-elect quote tweeted me a story that I told about a tow truck driver that I was with that weekend. It was just really struggling to get by. And I think that his participation in that discussion, especially considering how large of a role Elon Musk played, certainly I think kind of centered a lot of the discussion around my account. And, JD and I have interacted a little bit in prior years, but I don't think he knows who I am. I'd be surprised. But, we both happen to be Marines. We both in the Midwest. I think JD's team is concerned with my neighbors and people who live in small Midwestern towns. And so when we're talking about something like immigration, there's a sort of obvious connection here to the sort of Trump mandate and the Rust Belt. And, as a political scientist who happens to live surrounded by people who have blue collar jobs and blue collar lives, there's a sort of different perspective that I think I bring to the table. It's an intersection of these two worlds that is particularly salient in this political moment. And I think that's, if I were to explain why I've been involved so centrally in this discussion, it would be that point right there.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you've been interacting with one of his alts, actually. No, just joking.
Who knows? Maybe we're mutuals. I don't know it. He DMs me.
Podcast, so
That's right. I assume this is the center of power and wealth. We are the movers and shakers.
Well, no, I mean, JD. Well, just in some context, I am gonna say I am the first citation in Hillbilly Elegy.
Is that right? Congratulations.
Yeah, he knows my content. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay. So you're at the center of this. So just obviously, well, we have like a third non-American downloaders right now. I mean, so there's this immigration issue in the United States. Just for the context for the outsiders, because I think they see the United States as this like vast empire that's just like sucking people in. But just so everyone knows, our immigration system is a total mess. Partly because we haven't had any legislation in I think like a generation. I think since the '86. Josiah, like, do you know? Neely, do you know? Like, since the '86 amnesty under Reagan, we haven't had a big like immigration legislation since then, have we?
It's not a big one.
Like everything is like incremental, some regulatory change, this or that, right?
Yes, right, and there have been a number of attempts during the George W. Bush administration, and then during the Obama administration to have some sort of grand bargain, whatnot.
Yeah, like,
and those have all been focused on the border, illegal immigration, that sort of thing. Stuff like the H1-B or legal immigration. There is Tom Cotton, I think, it's called the RAISE Act or whatnot that would do some stuff with legal immigration. various people have tried to do
Yeah.
something, but I don't think nothing's really moved.
Yeah. And one of the issues with legal versus illegal, high scale versus low scale is, from what I remember, actually, and what I've heard, the crux of why the grand bargain, because that's what they call it, the grand bargain, was never gets done between the Democrats and the Republicans, is the Democrats basically want another amnesty of all of the undocumented, let's say they're more the low-skilled immigration from Mexico. And, the Republican perspective on that is you just want more voters, So they're like, no. But they have said, and this is how we're pivot to the conversation we had this week, Republicans have said, we'll give you the skilled immigrants. We'll do a compromise here. And the Democrats basically said, no, we're not going to do a compromise. We have to we got to do both. We got to do everything. Because the Democrats, and I think they're correct on this, if the Republicans said, okay, we'll give you, I don't know, 1 million skilled slots or whatever, they would never necessarily want to go back to the amnesty. They would never want to, and that's what the Democrats fear, right? Now, this is also not an artifact, but this is a phenomenon of the last generation, the last 20 years. Those of us that are ancient, like me and Mr. Neely, we remember the 1990s, back when there was the Barbara Jordan Commission. Barbara Jordan was a politician from Texas, a black woman, and she actually recommended reduced immigration. And President Bill Clinton, was actually quite open to that at the time. Immigration has not been such a polarized partisan issue. Although, obviously there are Democrats who, helped over the borders or whatever, but, Republicans, they want labor, right? You say, Lippincott, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do. So in 2008, when Barack Obama gave his acceptance speech at the DNC, one of the points that he made, which is easy to skip over, is he talks about that we can all agree that illegal immigrants should not be taking American jobs. And so I think Obama really, and this is a point I've been making for a while now, Obama ran on a sort of MAGA-like platform in 2008. Reduce the number of foreign wars. We don't want these illegal aliens stealing our jobs. We're going to have racial harmony. We have a multi-ethnic working class coalition that brings whites and blacks and Hispanics together to open a new chapter. And I think it's striking that the Democrats absolutely did not deliver on that platform. And I think Trump inherited that Obama 2008 mandate after he dropped the ball.
Yeah. One thing that I find interesting about the immigration issue as it's developed in the last couple of weeks, specifically talking about legal immigration and the H1-B or whatever, is that Trump seems to be siding with Elon on this. I mean, he made some comments first about, endorsing H1-B, and then he had some other comments about we got to stop illegal immigration, but legal's fine. And actually, this is consistent with some prior comments he's made. I think during the campaign, at one point, he said that anyone who attended an American university should get a green card. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Really quickly though, this is before that as well. When he was on ban of the show, Trump's instinct does seem to be, if you're the best, however he defines it, come on in. He just doesn't want the worst people, quote unquote, from shithole places. That Trump has a very hierarchy in his brain. And he's if you're the best, you can be from Antarctica, an alien, whatever,
Yeah, and I would say to Trump's point, and I think there's a lot of people who don't fully grasp I think he's of two minds. That on the one hand, there was a story someone was telling in the context of this discussion that during his administration, the Tennessee Valley Water Authority was going to bring in a bunch of H-1B visas to replace Americans they had just fired prior to Christmas. And that was a moment where Trump stepped in to put pressure on the TVA's board to prevent that from happening. So I think Trump will say things we want the best and brightest, but he doesn't want it at the expense of his voters. And if you put it to him in that sort of context, well, then he appears, to quote unquote flip-flop. But I think you're right in saying Trump will say, we want the best, most talented people. We want 1,000 Elon Musks a year or 10,000 Elon Musks a year. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty of firing Americans before Christmas to ship their jobs overseas, Trump's a lot more reticent than to say, oh, best and brightest alone. And I think he does have that sort of economic nationalist view. And then it comes out in those circumstances.
Yeah, I wonder how much. So this is an interesting question going forward because, of course, Stephen Miller is, I guess, deputy chief of staff for policy, something like that. I forget the exact name. And I would say he's much more of a illegal immigration skeptic even than Trump is. So, at some point, like they say, personnel is policy. Maybe some of this is going to be decided not by who, what Trump thinks, but by what the staff thinks of various people. JD also, JD Vance, interesting case, because I think you're right. He definitely has a heart for, people in the Rust Belt, other people who have really been hit, by a variety of factors, whether it's like foreign trade or yeah.
Neely, can you just give some context for why his JD's background just a little bit, because I think that explains it, and I think Lippincott alluded to it, just so people who don't know.
You're asking.
Like, where does the yeah, we're just tell people, like, just give some context of why the vice president would care about that sort of stuff.
Okay, yeah, right. Well, it's funny because there was Current Affairs magazine had an article recently, which was about like fake populism or whatever, and they had a picture of JD Vance, and they said like he was a fake populist because he went to Yale and worked in like VC or whatever. And it got community noted, and they said, well, actually, JD Vance, his mom was a drug addict. He grew up, in a blue collar environment and in the Midwest and so on and so forth. So I mean, like, that's his people, and he's as we
He also went to a public university for undergrad. So
right. And we've discussed previously, the work of David Hackett Fisher, Albion Seed. He's a clear borderer background, I think like 6 generations going back in Kentucky. So he definitely has that, like, that's the background he comes out of. His book is all about that sort of stuff. And he kind of got out of that in a sense, going to Yale, working in, as VC, married a Indian American woman or whatever. And then I think he decided, so he could have sometimes people do that, like they kind of turn their back on, that whatever aspects of their background or upbringing or whatnot. But he decided he didn't want to do that. And so that's, I think, kind of like the overarching theme of his political life. I don't know if you agree with that, other Josiah, but
yeah, I do. And I would say, to go in addition to that, it's interesting. He was anti-Trump at the beginning, I think kind of almost through 2020. But I think there was very much when he moved back to Ohio and he began doing that venture capital work to bring money into the Midwest. And he publishes this book that everyone claims is the best explainer of the Trump phenomenon in 2016, or is at least a very heartfelt socioeconomic analysis of the forgotten American, right? And I think eventually Vance got pulled back into the orbit of his childhood after leaving. And, it's interesting. I think, I don't want to go too far, but I feel like I know how that happens, like I see that myself, I have a feet in both worlds, and I was never anti-Trump. I've always supported him. And I wasn't in, Yale tier, respectability, but I definitely, traveled the world, had, respectable profession, knew elite people, went to DC. And then there's a sense of when you go back to the Midwest and you see your neighbors and you see what's happening, it hits you much more fully. And, I love my small town here. I own a home here. We've had kids here. My life is here.
Are you from Michigan?
Well, I've made it my home. I grew up in California, but I came here in 2012, and apart from the 4 years in the Corps, this is where I've lived. And I have roots here, and this is as close to a home as I've ever felt.
Wait, what part of California are you from originally, though?
The Central Valley, Tulare, near Fresno.
Okay, I went to grad school at UC Davis. So.
Okay, yeah.
Just so people know, like, when California is a big state. I think even Americans who don't go very often, maybe they go to SF or LA, they don't realize there's a massive state. It's in the lower 48. It's the second largest state by area, but also it's very long and narrow. And so you could basically going from Oregon to Mexico is the way you need to think about it. And then, once you go to the Central Valley, this is very rural. I mean, obviously it's within driving distance of SF or maybe LA if you live like in Bakersfield, but it's very rural, it's very agricultural. There's still some oil derricks, especially the southern part of San Joaquin Valley, and there's a lot of small towns with a lot of agricultural laborers, and there's also an aspect of Americana there until recently, at least. Immigration, whatever, have changed things, but was it American Graffiti? I think was set in Modesto, which is a Central Valley town.
Yeah. And I will say this, as I grew up in a predominantly Hispanic community, and I grew up poor in a predominantly Hispanic community. So that's a different perspective even then. Like, I grew up renting. All of my neighbors were Hispanic. Most of them did not speak English. Many of them were illegal immigrants. So my touchstone for immigration is very personal, and it was the way I grew up. And one of the most important moments in my childhood was, I think it was 2004, Republicans were aiming to impose more severe penalties on illegal immigration. And illegal immigrants in Tulare marched down the middle of the main strip right outside of where my house was, flying the Mexican flag. And I remember my father and I, when I was just a boy, were out there watching this happen. And I asked my father, how can these people fly the flag of a foreign country on American soil? And my father was as stern and hard-hearted as I have probably ever seen him. And I think it was that moment where he became a Trump voter, or that was the moment. And it doesn't surprise me that all these years later, as my father was the first person I knew who really wanted Trump to run for president, even in 2011 and 12. And so that was the context. Like, I'm literally watching the flag of a foreign power march down the main street and thinking, what country am I even living in at this point? So that's the formative prehistory of how we got to where I am now.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah,
my dad was pissed off.
Go on.
Exact same thing, actually. I think that was probably, in terms of like political own goals. I remember those rallies with the like Mexican flags or whatever, and that's. I mean, people have like a lot of different, like immigration. It's almost like a kind of omni issue, is that it can suck in all like any other like political issue, whether it's healthcare or schools or crime or the environment or like culture war stuff,
Housing,
right? Yeah.
One thing I was saying is, I grew up in Oregon, and I did move to California at some point, but a little later than. Well, I mean, in the late 2000s is what I'll say. But, so obviously, like, I did not have that experience. I mean, I grew up in Eastern Oregon, so not in like the Portland area. Like, I grew up by Idaho, so I have a totally different experience than you guys. Like, so Neely grew up in Texas, and you were in California. So, just for the listener viewer who's not like keyed into this sort of stuff, I mean, I think part of the issue here is, the people that are leading this movement of like whatever, undocumented immigrants, illegal immigrants' rights. They're obviously not American because the optics are moronic. It's like everyone knows that, like, okay, you want to stay here and you're flying the Mexican flag. That is totally counterproductive, right? I just remember thinking when I was seeing this on the news, I'm like, who's leading these people? Because like people are gonna like want to ship them back to the country that they claim they are, if that makes sense.
And let me just say, because I think there's a bit of a parallel with some of the more recent protests, after October 7th relating to Gaza and other stuff like that, which is not strictly a immigration issue, but in the background, because you see a lot of people that are waving, I don't know if it's like Hamas flags or other stuff that a lot of Americans perceive as being like very alien to American values, and there is a kind of like question. It's like, well, how did this happen? That there's big pro Hamas rallies in American cities, and immigration not at the forefront of that, but I'm sure like in the back of some people's minds, that's an issue that comes up as well, right?
And I can say this, I'm a George Washington farewell address respecter, which I think puts me on the far right fringe of acceptable American discourse, and probably unrespectable at this point. Which is to say, I don't want foreign influence in American affairs. I think we should pursue our own interest. I don't want to be sucked into people's foreign wars. I don't, as people, they'll ask, well, who do you support in Israel, Gaza? And it's like, I support America because I'm an American. I don't want to kill Palestinians or Gazans abroad, but I also don't want to support them in terror actions against other countries, Israel or whatever. It's like, I really do want a policy toward the world that stays out of these sort of permanent conflicts. We need to focus on ourselves. And that's just an attitude that's so hard for Americans now to grasp the possibility of neutrality as a principle. That's just almost completely gone from American political discourse. So when I talk, people like, I don't even know what box to put me in, but that I think is a key point that's just been lost in these discussions, is that we, as Washington warns, we have become slaves to our passions and interests in other places. We have lost our freedom of action and our independence. I'd like to get it back. And controlling immigration, reducing our involvement in foreign wars, raising tariffs, to me, that's the pathway to sovereignty and the pathway to as much political happiness as we can have. And we are not well served by being involved in these just unending and brutal conflicts abroad that never seem to end. And I don't know if we can end them. So I'm very hard-headed about foreign policy simply for that reason.
Are you?
Yeah. Go on, Neely.
I was just gonna say, because it's true. The U.S. I mean, it's not just foreign wars, but of course we've got like bases all over the place. Military involvement and all sorts of stuff. I don't know. Like, would you classify yourself as more like a Ron Paul guy? We should just draw all that stuff back, or I know this is a little off topic.
No, not at all. I think it's all related. I would describe myself as a founding guy. I look at the American founders, and a lot of my research is in American international relations and political thought. So my focus is particularly on the break between the founders' foreign policy and the progressive era foreign policy. So there's just a totally different view, a concern with humanity and the world and globalism that comes out at the beginning of the 20th century. But prior to that, America had a very restrained foreign policy tradition. We just did not have bases worldwide, save for areas that were directly in our interest. For instance, Barbary pirates raiding American shipping in the Mediterranean, that provoked an American response. But the founders never had the idea of waging wars for democracy, or we need to defend our greatest ally, Israel, or the United Kingdom, or something like that. And very frequently, they just had the hard-headed view that all these other powers have different interests. We can have peace with them, but the alliances are entirely utilitarian. There's no ideological component there at all. So in a way, yes, it sounds a lot like Ron Paul's. Like, I don't think we should have these bases in these places. I think America's bases in Germany, Turkey, Italy, Japan, they're net negatives. They're a drain on our resources. And I came to see that very clearly when I was stationed abroad. It was when I was standing in Okinawa wondering what we're even doing here that I got the idea for the dissertation that I ended up writing, which is that history. Ideologically, how did we end up with this large contingent of Marines defending Japan, our former enemy, from China, our former ally? And that's where, a lot of my thinking has gone in terms of trying to grasp this international system. But I think it's all of a piece with the immigration discussion, certainly.
So let me just ask real quick, because we're alluding to this, just in terms of the various the founding and the founding people, and I mean, I'm assuming you read Albion Seed. So are you, what is your Anglo folkway background? Because I mean you're heritage American, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so the progenitor of the Lippincott line arrived in America in 1632. He left back for England. I think he came back in 1639. There may be some fighting over the dates among genealogists, but as far as I can tell, it's about 400 years that we've lived here. And I would say 1639. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So English Civil War era type.
You're a redhead.
He was a Quaker. He was fleeing from religious oppression.
Oh,
and then he was imprisoned for a time in England. He was then freed. He went to Rhode Island, and I think he lived long enough that King Philip's War, he had to leave during the brutal conflict with the Indians in that region. So in terms of my nationalism, I'd say I really like the Federalist 8 account, or the Federalist 2 account of what does it mean to be an American citizen? We share the same language, the same religion. We have similar forefathers. We're united geographically by rivers that bring us together and communication. But there's a sort of shared political interest. There's a sharing of blood and a common heritage. But of course, there had been immigration from places like the Netherlands and even Germany and France at the time of the founding into the United States. There's, of course, the grave problem of African forced migration, which the founders were opposed to but had to deal with. And I think that view of nationalism is, the first Immigration Act to the United States talks about free white persons of good character. So the founders are not simply white nationalists, and they're not simply Anglophiles. They were very opposed to British, political power in the North American continent and landmass. And so I would say my view is fundamentally American, and it takes account of you need to share a fundamental identity. And it's not that there's no quote unquote diversity. It's that you need to keep that highly regulated. You need to minimize the amount of unproductive division in your society. And you need to focus on the happiness of the people who live in that country. So, it really is. It's more. I think there's a lot of confusion about what the founders were like. Liberals lie about it. The right wing oftentimes doesn't quite understand either. They're more.
Well, I mean, what do you say? Okay, I'm going to use a technical word, which I don't mean a non-technical way. I mean a colloquial way. My own perception, my own sense, is there's a lot of ahistoricism in terms of trying to understand them because they lived in a particular time and place. So, let's just say they were neither Barack Hussein Obama nor David Duke, because those people only make sense in the late 20th century, early 21st century, right?
Yeah. And the founders have ideas, the natural rights theory of government, which they claim applies at all times and all places. And you can fight about that, but to understand them, you have to understand they believe that the natural rights principles, that the doctrine of equality, that their understanding of morality and justice was for all times and all places. And yet they also maintained that to achieving that kind of regime or that framework of justice required a particular people in a particular place. The founders are very hard-headed. I mean, Jefferson has got these great quotes about Haiti, and I think Hamilton on Haiti, and there's quotes on from Governor Morris about like France and the revolution. Like, these Europeans are not fit for freedom. These white people cannot figure out how to have a Republican form of government. And I think that shows you the founders, again, they're in that context. And when they often, I wish things would turn out well for this other people, but they're often very hard-headed, like not going to work very well.
I want to table like conversation about white people for the paid section. Okay,
that's right. There you go.
Let's go. Let's go back. To immigration and H1-B. So I mean, here's like just a straight up question, and just for the I want to like kind of like set like the context for it, because again, like we're all. I mean, I don't consider myself a political person, but you guys are both very political people, So like, this is all like natural to you. You guys understand like there's this position, that position, and stuff. Okay, so for the listener out there, there's a whole range of positions on immigration in the United States. And one point you consider like open borders, which is very far left liberals and also libertarians that have traditionally pushed that in the Republican Party. Actually, I mean, the Wall Street Journal used to say there shall be no borders, whatever, all this stuff, right? And then on like the right, more on the right, although until recently, also parts of the left in part, there were more people that wanted lower immigration. The left would want this partly just because you tighten labor supply, you increase the wages. So Samuel Gompers, National Federation of Labor, whatever, the labor guy in the early 20th century, he also supported the 1924 Origins Act or the immigration restriction. Probably less for racial reasons and more just for labor reasons, right? And then there's obviously people who care about national, ethnic balance, the national character, the national culture, and to some extent even the racial aspect, right? On the far, well, I'll say far right, whatever. And so you have like these two spectrums, and some people they want a pause, which basically it's not going to be a 100% pause, just like universal healthcare coverage is not 100%, right? But it would be like a big drop, and we had that to some extent. Just from 1924, with the Europe, basically there's a quotas act that like really decreased migration from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. And just so people know, non-black, people from Asia could not be naturalized for a really long time into the 20th century, actually. So that's like off the table anyway, because of I think the amendment after the Civil War, blacks could be naturalized, and the people from the Latin America, they could as well. I don't know. I just know that Indians had to marry Mexican women in California to get land. Okay. Because the Mexican women were American citizens. This is the early 20th century. So just to set all that aside, where are you? Are you a pauser? Are you a deport all non-white people? I don't know. Honestly, jumping into the conversation, I just again, most people are not on Twitter or not on X, although some of I'm assuming that our listeners are disproportionately. There was about 27 different positions circling around the drain all week in the last couple of weeks. Okay, so I've spoken. So let's let Lippincott have his piece.
Yeah. So my position on immigration is that we need a substantial reduction in legal immigration and a complete deportation of all illegal immigrants. And what this last week's discussion has convinced me is that we need to clamp down hard on quote unquote high skilled immigration. We need way more regulations on this program. We need to tax the companies that use them. The proposal I just put out on Twitter 30 minutes ago was that we need to have that every H1-B visa that we give out, if we're going to keep this program, the employer who hires that foreigner should take the equivalent of that foreigner's salary and benefits and put it into a scholarship and jobs training program for native-born Americans to fill that job in the future. And the reason I'm saying all of this is because I think we are losing our coherent national identity. We are undergoing political transformation that is profoundly racialized. It's also profoundly left-wing and destructive. That this is undoing American values, and that the core point right now is we need to hard stop the social revolution, and then we need to look at what will happen going forward. So, I think a lot of, in a globalized world, as someone who is quite well traveled abroad, I know people abroad. I like them. I like the foreigners that I know. I like the Asians and Africans I've gotten to meet. That doesn't mean I need them as fellow citizens or want them as neighbors. It means I'm willing to go and visit them abroad, right? I'm willing to go visit Tokyo and meet Japanese friends. That doesn't mean I want to import all of Japan here. And I think there's a lot of negative reasons, negative consequences to that kind of immigration policy. I think we've swung way too far in the favor of the open society. I think it's highly unstable. I think we are playing with fire. The economic consequences of selling the American birthright, of allowing foreigners first crack at the prosperity and wealth of the nation, is going to radicalize young people like no other issue in American life. And it's going to come to a head in an explosive way if we don't do something. To me, Donald Trump is the moderate centrist option. He is a social liberal, a moderate economic nationalist, and that's the center position, and that's why I'm a Trump supporter. I want to do the Trump agenda so we don't have explosive problems down the line, because I feel like I'm losing my country. In many ways, I've lost my country. I don't recognize my neighbors. The names on the gravestones where my grandparents are buried do not match the last names of the people that you meet walking around everywhere. We're losing a historical existence. Talk about ahistoricity. We're losing that foundation. And
sure.
And I support, I want Indians to be happy in India. I want Arabs to be happy in Arabic countries. I want the Chinese to be happy in China. And I don't think we should just strip the human resources out of these places like we're mining them. No, I think top tier Indian and Chinese talent should make India and China better places to live. And so there, I think I really am diverging from the sort of, we support legal immigration. And I'm like, we've had way too much of it. It's become a problem. And it's not a personal thing. I don't look at, someone's like, you're brown, I need to deport you. It's like, I'm saying, looking at
that sort of problem. We got to pay all that sort of content, right?
That's right. I'm a moderate. I'm a moderate centrist. I'm a moderate.
You can let the mask off of the pillow. No, I want to give some Josiah or Neely. Sorry, I will let you speak, but I do want to give some just empirical context for the listener out there, because it is some of the numbers are frankly pretty shocking to me, and I kind of knew it, and like I've been in and around the immigrant. I mean, like, I'm friends with Mark Krikorian. Like I've said this online. Like I'm friends with Mark Krikorian. I've hosted Peter Bimbo for dinner. Like I'm friends with immigration restrictions. I didn't even realize the numbers. Look, I got a life. Everyone's got a life when they're busy. What's happened over the last 4 years under the Hibernian hegemony of Joe Biden is unprecedented. Actually, I have to say, a lot of us are pretty insulated from what's been happening. Like I don't live at the border. Josiah and I do not. Neither and I do not live at the border. So, but anyway, the Canadian border is also a whole thing, and I don't want to get into that. But that's actually not great either. But in any case, so we get like about a million illegal or legal immigrants a year, right? Like 800,000, whatever, around there. But under the Hibernian hegemony, it's gone. Like the other foreign nationals, so these are like quote asylum seekers or whatever, went from a few 100,000. Actually, like they mostly disappeared under Obama and Trump. There were like 300,000, whatever, 400,000, 200,000 under George W. Bush. Well, under Biden, it looks like they're going to 2 million. Okay? Like that's an order of magnitude change. This is why people are freaking out at the border. This is why we have like massive issues with housing in blue states that have fiat guarantees of housing for these people. Joe Biden, the Hibernian hegemony, was taking a nap the last 4 years. And this is why we don't have Kamala Harris as president, so maybe some of you are happy about that. I'm just saying, like, there's some serious stuff going on that people are mad for a reason. It's not like, this is not like histrionics or rhetoric. Like, this is very different. If you just Google U.S. immigration rate by year, the charts will come up. This is not like this kind of just snuck up on us. Basically, Biden decided to go to sleep when he was inaugurated when it came to the border. The border is totally out of control. Anyway, I just want to say that.
Yeah, and I think looking at the immigration issue, it's become so central. And one of the things that came out in the last week, especially with the high-skilled immigrants, and this really rubbed me the wrong way. You then see these people all these politicians that are on camera saying, these are the best and the brightest, the best and the brightest, the best and the brightest. They get here and then they act like they own the place. Like, we need to dictate to you how things are going to be. And I'm seeing employers, and I had people when I posted about my resume and then, is there a real labor shortage? These people are so dumb. These people, these big tech firms are like, well, I'll pay you a wage. If you go teach yourself computer programming and uproot your life and come to California, then maybe I'll consider hiring you in Orange County at $150,000 a year. And I want to look at these people and be like, if there were a real labor shortage, you would be begging young Americans to get these jobs. You would be paying their way through school. You'd be doubling the salary offers that you're making. You would be acting like there's a real need. You are acting like there's a glut of labor because you're demanding that young people train themselves at their own expense to come work for you. That's how you can tell there's no doctor shortage in America, because everyone has to go into debt to become a doctor. It's like, okay, that means there's no shortage. That means you got to fight to get these kinds of jobs. And what that's indicating to me is there's just been an attitudinal shift and a mask-off moment in the last 2 weeks that the damage done to immigrant communities right now is enormous. Because
so I do have to say, we need to go to paywall soon because we don't have forever. But I do want to say real quickly, I do think that these things like doctors and software engineers, for example, I do have to say, though, I think there are conflating multiple issues. So, for example, with the doctor thing, there's a lot of libertarians and, I guess supply side liberals and just like Republicans in general who will say things like, and I agree with this, I've been on this for forever. The medical cartel is a problem, right? And so there's a lot of things that doctors do that they charge for, that nurse practitioners, nurses, or even other medical professionals that are much cheaper could do. But the medical cartels, the AMA, American Medical Association, and others, they advise the government on which things a doctor has to sign off on, so that the doctor gets the cut of that, right? And so this sort of issue makes it so medical services are restricted to the small pool of people who go through all this credentialing. And then you're like, oh, okay, so we got to get. So, for example, if you did grow up in the northern Midwest, if you grew up in the Midwest, you saw a lot of Indian doctors. You know why? Because doctors love living in San Diego. That's fun about. So they'll do a residency, but like they're gonna set up their practice in somewhere nice and warm, like California or Florida. So there's been this problem because there's only a certain number of doctors that are graduated every year, and who controls that? The American Medical Association. So I'm just saying, like, there's software engineering. There are different dynamics, and so I do like. I'm not saying I object, but I think that on social media, all these different things have been kind of mushed together, and I think there's a lot of things that we can do. So, for example, like let's say you, Lippincott, do not want all these foreign doctors. Well, actually, the easiest solution is what libertarians have been proposing, and like a lot of people have been proposing for like generation, which is like, okay, let's like loosen who can do medical things, because then you increase and redistribute the supply of medical services. So when I've been saying the doctor argument, I'm just like always I'm thinking like we have a solution. We actually, yes, we don't need 4 doctors for a lot of it. I mean, I think we might need some. It depends on. We need to look at the details, but definitely some of the pressure could be released just by deregulating medicine a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things that I said in this same tweet thread is I said the United States medical licensing examination should be available to anyone who wants to take it. And if you can go get an apprenticeship or you study on your own and you can memorize how the kidneys work, and then you can go regurgitate that in a scientific way on a comprehensive exam, okay, what's the difference between you and someone who went to med school? Like, why do you need a JD to take the law bar exam? That's insane. Abraham Lincoln.
You don't in California, right?
Yeah, but most states you do. Like Michigan, you can't run for like attorney general or for the DA unless you have a law degree, and you can only get that if you go through the cartel. So I portray myself as a libertarian on immigration because immigration is a form of corporate welfare. It's central planning. The decision to have open borders is a kind of central planning that gives a subsidy to these cartels that have these monopolies. So in my mind, you never are out of the political problem of having a state. That's where I diverge from the libertarian anarcho-capitalist view. But I don't want corporate welfare for hospitals. It's like, I want the doctors to get paid a good salary. And for someone of those professional qualifications, the residency system is slavery. I mean, they are working these people 100 plus hours a week, 80,000 a year. This is wrong. I mean, this is absolutely wrong. And then you see DEI policies at the med schools. Like University of Michigan Med School, 60% plus of the students are female. And it's like, that is not because young men are stupid. That's not the reason. It's just the grind and debt that you need to go into to get to the place where you can be a doctor, and moreover, the level, the kind of the kind of personality type that's being rewarded, and the sort of DEI policies mean you just aren't going to get that kind of talent. And then you're going to turn around and say we have a shortage. No, that's government created.
All right, okay. So Neely, you haven't talked for a while. Before we go to pay, like do you got stuff to say? Like I don't know. You just been like you are the non-voluble Josiah today.
Well, let's go to paywall and then we can continue the discussion. That's what I would say.
Hope you enjoyed the podcast so far. To listen to the rest of it, please go to conversation.substack.com.
Two minds met on a summer's eve, each with truths they long believed. Words flowed like a winding stream as hours passed in deep debate. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. In listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. It's not about who's wrong or right, but understanding others' right. In civil discourse we can find the ties that gently bind. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see the shared humanity. As dawn broke soft on dewy grass, they smiled and shook hands at last. Two souls enriched by reason talk, united in respect. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see the shared humanity. This folk song captures the essence of a long, thoughtful discussion between two public intellectuals. It emphasizes the power of patient listening, mutual respect, and the discovery of common ground. The gentle tone reflects the common understanding they reach after their debate. Would you like me to expand on any aspects of the lyrics or discuss the theme?